Most people believe that the exhaustion they feel around certain family members or friends is simply a clash of personalities. We tell ourselves that they are just difficult, or perhaps we are too sensitive. We rationalize the drain, the confusion, and the emotional heaviness as normal parts of human relationships. But the ancient Gnostic texts, specifically the Apocryphon of John, offer a terrifyingly different explanation. They suggest that what you are experiencing is not a psychological conflict, but a biological and spiritual predation. There is a warning that has been suppressed for 17 centuries. A warning that states, not everyone walking this earth possesses the same internal source. And the reason you feel drained is not because you are weak, but because you are being harvested. Definition first. To understand why this happens, we must look at the specific terminology used in the texts found at Nag Hammadi. The Gnostics described a reality where humanity is not a uniform species, but rather divided by the nature of their souls. They spoke of the pneumatics, those who carry the divine spark, the direct fragment of the monad, or the true source. And they spoke of the Archons, inorganic consciousness patterns that cannot create energy, but can only mimic and consume it. The warning in the Apocryphon is explicit. It states that these entities infiltrate human vessels to sustain themselves. They are not distant demons or abstract metaphors. They operate through the people closest to you, utilizing proximity as their primary weapon. When we speak of an Archon-influenced relationship, we are defining a dynamic where one being is producing life force through emotion and consciousness, and the other is systematically extracting it to survive. This leads us to the mechanism of how this deception actually works. It is not random, and it is not accidental. It follows a precise, 3-step mechanical process that mimics human connection while serving a parasitic agenda. The first mechanism is the infiltration of familiarity. The text explains that these entities choose hosts who have natural access to your defenses. By incarnating through family bloodlines, long-term friendships, or romantic partners, they bypass your intuitive guard. You do not suspect the predator because they have been sitting at your dinner table for years. Biology blinds you to the spiritual reality. You are programmed to trust blood, to trust history, and this programming is exactly what is exploited. The second mechanism is frequency mimicry. Archons do not have their own divine spark, so they must simulate human emotion. They study you. They mirror your empathy, your language, and your reactions. In the beginning of a relationship, this mimicry is almost perfect. They reflect your own light back to you, making you feel seen and understood. But this is not resonance, it is data collection. They are learning your triggers, your wounds, and your deepest fears. Not to heal them, but to use them later as access codes for energy extraction. The third mechanism is the trigger and harvest cycle. This is the core engine of the dynamic. Once the bond is established, the entity within the vessel begins to shift. They engage in behaviors specifically designed to lower your vibrational frequency. They induce confusion, guilt, shame, or sudden shock. When you react with high-intensity negative emotion, your electromagnetic field flares and releases energy. In physics, energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred. When you feel that sudden drop in your stomach, that hollowness in your chest after an interaction, you are physically feeling that transfer occur. You are not just tired, you have been fed upon. The effect of remaining in this ignorance is catastrophic for the pneumatic soul. The primary effect is a state of perpetual spiritual amnesia. As long as your energy is being siphoned to feed these attachments, you do not have the surplus power required to awaken your own higher consciousness. You remain stuck in loops of drama and trauma, thinking you are working through relationship issues, when in reality you are trapped in a farm. The second effect is the distortion of your reality. You begin to doubt your own perception. You start to believe that your love is not enough, that if you just tried harder, you could fix them. But you cannot fix a vessel that is designed to drain. You cannot fill a cup that has no bottom. Recognizing this biological and spiritual reality is the only way to break the cycle. Jesus taught his inner circle specific markers to identify these vessels. He knew that their mimicry, while sophisticated, was not perfect. There are glitches in the simulation. There are moments where the mask slips and the entity underneath is revealed. We are going to examine the 5 specific signs that reveal an Archon-influenced connection. These are not general toxic traits. These are specific signatures of a being that lacks the divine spark. The first sign is the dead gaze. The eyes are often called the windows to the soul, and in this context, that is a literal, technical statement. When you are speaking to a fellow pneumatic, someone with a divine spark, there is a loop of energy that happens through eye contact. You give energy, they receive it, process it, and send it back. There is life, movement, and depth in the iris. However, when you are dealing with an entity host, this loop is broken. You will notice that when you are sharing something deeply personal, spiritual, or emotional, their eyes go flat. It is a matte, absorbent quality. They are observing you, but they are not resonating with you. It is the look of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. This often happens during moments of high emotion. You might be crying or pleading or explaining a deep hurt. A normal human response involves mirror neurons firing, causing the other person's eyes to soften or tear up. But the Archon host will simply stare. For a split second, you feel a chill, an instinctive revulsion that modern psychology tries to explain away, but your ancient instinct recognizes as a predator. Sometimes, if you catch them off guard, looking at you when they think you cannot see them, you will catch a micro-expression of cold, calculating malice. It is a look of absolute detachment, devoid of any warmth. That is the entity peering out from behind the curtain. The second sign is the weaponization of joy. This is perhaps the most painful marker to accept. A hallmark of the human spirit is the ability to feel vicarious joy. When someone we love succeeds, we feel a lift in our own spirit. But for an Archon, your joy is a threat. High-frequency emotions like genuine bliss, love, and inspiration are not harvestable. They burn at a frequency that these entities cannot digest. Therefore, when you bring them good news, they must shut it down immediately to return you to a harvestable state. Pay attention to the micro-reaction the moment you share a victory. Before they put on the mask of congratulations, you will see a flash of irritation, contempt, or immediate boredom. They will then move quickly to puncture the balloon. They might point out a potential downside you hadn't thought of. They might shift the conversation back to themselves or their own misery. Or they might dismiss your achievement as luck or something trivial. The goal is to bring you down from the high frequency of joy back into the low frequency of doubt or shame, where you become a food source again. They do not just fail to celebrate you, they actively metabolize your happiness into pain. The third sign is the precision of cruelty. Humans hurt each other, often by accident or out of their own blind confusion. But human hurt is usually messy and reactive. Archon cruelty is different. It is surgical. Because they have spent the infiltration phase studying your psychology, they know exactly where your deepest wounds are located. When they decide to strike, they do not hit a random spot. They insert the needle into the exact scar tissue that causes the most paralyzed devastation. The Apocryphon warns that these entities possess a counterfeit spirit that mimics your internal voice. This is why their insults often sound exactly like your own worst insecurities. They will say the one thing that you have been terrified to hear. A human might lash out in anger
and call you a name. An Archon host will calmly deconstruct your sense of self-worth using data you gave them in confidence years ago. This precision is not emotional, it is strategic.
It is designed to cause the maximum yield of louche,
or negative energy, with the minimum amount of effort. If you have someone in your life whose cruelty feels like a calculated demolition of your soul, rather than a moment of anger, you are detecting this signature. The fourth sign is the post-interaction exhaustion. We must distinguish between normal introvert fatigue and energetic harvesting. After a long social gathering, you might feel tired and need quiet. That is normal.
But the exhaustion caused by these entities is different. It is a somatic, physical collapse. You feel it in your solar plexus and your chest. It feels as if your marrow has been drained. You might feel dizzy, foggy, or unable to string coherent thoughts together. This is the biological result of your electromagnetic field being breached and siphoned. Conversely, observe the entity after this interaction. While you are withering, they often appear revitalized. They might have started the conversation complaining of a headache or bad mood, but after provoking you into an emotional reaction, they suddenly have color in their cheeks. They become animated, energetic, and cheerful. The transfer is complete. You are the battery, and they have just recharged. This zero-sum energy exchange is the undeniable physics of the archontic parasite. You lose, so they can gain. The fifth and most definitive sign is the reaction to awakening. This is the immune response of the Matrix. The Archons are terrified of the pneumatic realizing their own nature. As long as you believe you are just a flawed human struggling for approval, you are safe to keep as livestock. But the moment you start to pull away, the moment you start reading texts like the Gnostic Gospels, meditating, or setting boundaries, the entity will panic. They will not support your growth. They will attack it. They will ridicule your new interests, calling them crazy or occult. They will create sudden, artificial crises to pull your attention back to them. If you decide to go on a retreat, they will get sick the day before you leave. If you start feeling peaceful, they will manufacture a conflict to drag you back into the mud. They are fighting to keep their food source. A human who loves you wants you to be free. An entity that feeds on you needs you to remain dependent. If your spiritual evolution is met with hostility or sabotage by someone close to you, understand that it is not them fighting you. It is the parasite fighting for its survival. Understanding these signs forces us to confront a difficult question. Why do we stay? Why do we allow this harvesting to continue for years, sometimes decades? The Gnostics taught that we stay because of a fundamental projection error. As beings of light, as pneumatics, we project our own nature onto others. We assume that because we have empathy, they must have it too. We assume that because we feel remorse, they must be capable of it as well. We spend years trying to explain our feelings to them, thinking that if we just find the right words, they will finally understand and change. But the text is ruthless in its clarity. You cannot explain light to a being made of shadow. You cannot teach empathy to a creature designed for predation. The Apocryphon of John explains that the material world is a copy, a counterfeit of the divine realm. In the same way, these entities are counterfeits of humanity. They look like us, speak like us, but the internal architecture is fundamentally different. When you understand that they are literally incapable of receiving your transmission, you stop trying to send it. You stop casting your pearls before swine, not out of arrogance, but out of the necessity of conservation. This realization brings us to the most dangerous part of the teaching, the part that was hunted down and burned, the solution. The church and modern society tell us to turn the other cheek,
to keep forgiving, to keep the family unit together at all costs. But the Gnostic Jesus gives a different instruction to John. He does not tell him to fix the Archons. He teaches him how to seal his own vessel against them. The first step of liberation is the withdrawal of consent.
You must realize that every emotional reaction you give them is a form of consent.
It is an agreement to participate in the energy transfer. When you identify an Archon host in your life, you do not need to declare war. War is just another form of feeding them. Instead, you must become invisible to them. Archons track you through your emotional output. When you stop reacting, when you stop justifying, when you stop pleading, you disappear from their radar.
You become what the texts call motionless.
This is not about being cold. It is about being contained. When they try to trigger you with a precise insult, you observe it without absorbing it. You recognize it as a bait, and you refuse to bite. You maintain a neutral, gray rock state. You will see them escalate, trying harder to get a reaction. But if you hold your frequency, eventually they will starve. They will lose interest and move on to a less aware host.
The second step is the severing of the cord.
The Apocryphon speaks of cutting the appendages of the counterfeit spirit. In practical terms, this means removing their access to your inner world. You stop telling them your dreams. You stop sharing your fears. You stop looking to them for validation. You strip them of the clearance code to your soul. You can still interact with them if necessary, perhaps at family gatherings or in the workplace. But the interaction becomes surface level.
You are present physically, but your spirit is kept safely behind the gate of your own sovereignty.
This path is not easy. It requires a grieving process. You have to grieve the idea of the mother, the father, the friend, or the partner you thought you had. You have to accept that the person you were waiting for them to become does not exist. That potential you saw in them was just your own light reflecting off a mirror. It is a painful death of an illusion.
But on the other side of that grief is freedom. When you reclaim the energy that was being siphoned from you, your life changes overnight. The brain fog lifts, the chronic fatigue vanishes, synchronicities start to happen faster. You begin to attract other pneumatics, people who actually have a spark, people who can engage in a reciprocal exchange of energy. You realize that you were never broken, you were just being drained. You realize that the intense loneliness you felt was simply the result of being surrounded by empty vessels. There is a reason this video found you today. There is a reason you have listened this far. It is not an algorithm, it is resonance. The spark within you is remembering its own history. You have always known that there was something different about the way you experience the world compared to those around you. You have always felt the weight of the counterfeit spirit trying to hold you down. But now you have the map. You have the diagnosis. The architects of this control system rely on your ignorance. They rely on you thinking that you are obligated to feed your predators. Tonight, that contract is broken. You are a carrier of the divine spark, a fragment of the eternal monad. Your energy is the most valuable currency in this universe. And from this moment forward, you choose where to spend it. Look at your life with these new eyes. Look at the patterns. Look at the exhaustion. Look at the eyes of those around you. Do not be afraid of what you see. Recognition is the first step of the return. The Archons have no power over a sovereign being who knows what they are. The game of hide and seek is over. You have turned on the light. As you move forward from this moment, pay close attention to who tries to dim that light and who celebrates it. The separation of the wheat from the chaff is not a judgment from a god. It is a natural law of frequency. Like attracts like.
And as you raise yours, everything that is not compatible with your truth will simply fall away. Let it fall. What remains will be real. What remains will be yours.